So, hello, a very warm good evening to all of you, and welcome to Baiju's Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to the session of environment. Now, yesterday we have been discussing about the issue of land and soil pollution, and we have been discussing about the issues that how this land and soil pollution is caused, what are the impacts of it, and then we had moved into the areas of prevention and control measures. That if that pollution is happening, what are the ways, what are the methodologies by which we can control, we can prevent the amount of pollution from happening. So that is something that we had been looking into. Now we looked at the various different ways in which the waste is disposed, and before that we understood the concept of integrated waste management, where we observed that waste management is not only about collection and then disposal of the waste, but there are a slew of intermediary steps and intermediary measures which need to be taken care of when we talk about the comprehensive waste management. And that includes waste logistics, waste minimization, research and development about how to utilize and recycle that waste. We have also seen that legal compliance about whether the emission standards are being met or not, that is an important parameter. Then other than that, for example, the recycling, reuse, and whether there is a commodity trading and commodity exchange which is available for that or not. So all these various parameters, they are included in the portion of the integrated waste management. Now we looked at the concept of open dumps. What do we understand by open dumps? Then we looked at landfills, where we observed that land is basically dug out and there you have the waste which is thrown and then it is covered up. Now, these landfills have a problem of leaching, where all the various different liquefied chemicals, etc., the toxins, they start leaching into the lower portions of the soil. So they suffer from the problem of leaching. Now, in order to prevent or take care or get rid of that problem of leaching, you have the concept of a sanitary landfill. In the case of a sanitary landfill, what you do is basically you cover that landfill with a kind of an impermeable membrane or a kind of a non-penetrable layer of rocks, clay, etc., so as to ensure that whatever waste is there, it doesn't leach and basically toxicate the lower regions of the ground also, and even in certain cases, the groundwater. So that is something that we looked at. Then after that, we looked at the process of incineration. Now, incineration is also one of the methodologies of waste minimization. When we talk about disposal of the waste, now you have significantly larger amount and larger quantity of bulk waste. If it is burnt under controlled circumstances, it will produce enough amount of heat. It will produce gases also, but those gases you need to filter it out. But nonetheless, when you basically burn out all that large amount of waste, the energy produced will be so huge that that energy can be utilized for turning water into steam, and that steam can be used to operate the turbine generator sets and thereby produce electricity. So burning of the waste, incineration of the waste is and can be used in order to produce energy as well, reduce the amount of waste that you are eventually going to dispose of, and that is why it can be beneficial. Now, in the case of incineration, you carry out the process of combustion. That is, you burn the waste. That process of combustion is very predominant. Now, combustion is what? Combustion is when you burn anything in a constant supply of oxygen. Only then combustion will happen. When you carry out a complete burning of anything in the supply of oxygen, that is when combustion happens, or that is what we refer to as combustion. When we talk about then pyrolysis, what is pyrolysis? Pyrolysis is also a process of burning the materials, but in a limited supply of oxygen or maybe even absence of oxygen. Now, what will be the outcome of it, or why do we do that? And here, can we treat all and every kind of waste materials in the same manner? The answer is no. For pyrolysis, pyrolysis is basically a technique in which you burn the materials with a limited or an absent oxygen condition, where you don't allow the oxygen to pass on and you don't allow complete combustion to happen. So here, you do not carry out complete combustion. In this case, complete combustion is not carried out. Right. Basically, you have the partial burning. So, process of burning material in the absence of oxygen or in a controlled atmosphere for oxygen, controlled supply of oxygen. So, you have a kind of a partial burning. Now, what kind of materials do you treat in this way? So basically, the carbonaceous materials, which are carbon enriched. For example, when you talk about firewood waste, coconut, palm trash, corn combs, cashew shell, paddy straw, sawdust. So all of these kind of carbonaceous waste, which have significant amount of carbon compounds in them, now they are treated in this way. Now what happens is that partially burned or the partial unburned portion of these materials of this waste, that is reduced to charcoal. Okay, so these carbonaceous waste, when they are partially burned, so basically that produces charcoal. Okay, now that charcoal, it can then be utilized in order to carry out, let's suppose, if you have energy requirement in any kind of industry, so these charcoal pellets are then burned to produce energy. Okay, so this charcoal is a result of partial burning of the waste. Okay, partial burning of the waste. The residue is rich in carbon compounds and forms charcoal. Okay, now this is converted, the charcoal is converted into small pellets and is used as a source of energy for industrial processes. For industrial processes. Now, while you do that, while you are partially burning it out, you will also have certain types of gases which are produced, such as, for example, methane. Now, if you manage to, let's suppose, single out methane or isolate that methane, you can use that for energy source as well. Methane can be used as a source of energy. When you burn methane, you get energy from there also, right? So the output gases from this, right? So here, the output gases of gases can be used like methane can be used as a source of energy. Okay, so that is what is pyrolysis. So again, what is the difference between incineration and pyrolysis? Incineration is when you carry out a complete combustion, a complete burning, right? For example, if in case you are unable to distinguish, or if you are getting confused in complete and partial combustion, think about it. Let's suppose you have a lot of pieces of paper. You put fire on those pieces of paper. Now, those bundles of paper, as they start burning, suppose you cover them all up, right? You will find that you will have blackened and the browned portions of paper which are remain. It is no longer white anymore, but it will be blackened and brown in their significant portions. Now, that basically is a partially burnt paper, right? But for example, if you take the piece of paper, you put it outside, you light fire on it, very soon you will have very tiny and small ash, black ash materials which will accumulate. So that is complete combustion, almost complete combustion. So that is the difference in between the complete and the partial combustion. Okay, and even for example, I don't know how many of you have done that. I sincerely do not recommend you do that now at this point of time in your lives. But if ever you have been so mischievous enough that you had an old copy or something like that, and an old book or something which you did not like, if you ever have put a fire to a bundle of pages, you'll find that the top page, the bottom page, that burns completely, but the middle pages, there you will find the coloration is different, they get hardened, and they don't burn completely. That is because there is a impartial supply, or a rather limited supply of oxygen there. That is why complete combustion is not happening. So similarly, when we talk about sawdust, what is sawdust? So for example, let's suppose you are in a lumber shop, or in a kind of a carpentry shop. Now there, as they cut that wood, you have a lot of that sawdust which is accumulated, isn't it? Lot of that portions of wood dust which gets accumulated. Now what do you do with that? So there, if you carry out the partial combustion, they will be converted into a kind of a blackish substrate. That blackish substrate, you break it into the form of small pellets, and then you can use that for ignition purposes in the industrial processes, wherever the small scale, medium scale, or the cottage industries, wherever they require the process of heat, they can use that pellets. So here, basically, this is the case of pyrolysis. It is different from combustion. Okay, right. I have done that, which is used for cooking. Yes. And Bhagya, in places now also people using charcoal as tooth cleaner. Is it good? Well, I'm not going to attest to those particular things, but then obviously the aspect of charcoal for the utility of combustion is that we are going to talk about. But the health parameters of it is also something which many of us are not well aware of. For example, the presence of fluoride in our toothpaste, we are not very well aware of. You have many brands of toothpaste across the globe which are not allowed in India because of the limitations and the regulations of fluoride that we have. So that is where all the products that we end up using, many of the times we are not aware of their side effects and the harm impact that they can create. And right, so I have answered how absence of oxygen. So you take the materials in a kind of a controlled chamber, in a closed chamber, and you provide a limited supply of oxygen, and then you uh, stop the supply of oxygen. You keep that region or that chamber free of air, and it is that chamber controlled. Charcoal is used for cooking food also. Okay, right. Arsenic is a mineral. Arsenic, Chituri, is a kind of a mineral. Look at the periodic table of, I'm sure in school days you would have seen, at least seen a periodic table. So basically, that is arsenic, right? Yes, it is used for face mask also. How all of these gases are transferred with the help of the pipelines. Then we come across the process of composting. This is also a methodology of waste management. But in this process of composting, you only take the organic waste. And that organic waste, basically, it is allowed to degrade, it is allowed to decompose. That organic waste, when it carries out the process of degradation and decomposition naturally, it will get converted into a kind of a humus like substance, and that can be used as manures to be basically distributed into the various different farmlands and for agricultural production. So composting is a biological process in which degradable organic waste is decomposed into a kind of a humus like substance. Remember the stages of decomposition? You had humification as one of the penultimate stages. So here, with the help of the natural processes, so for example, let's suppose you have kitchen waste, right? The peels of vegetables, residues of food, fruits, etc. What is the kitchen waste? Now that kitchen waste, along with, let's suppose, the dried leaves, branches, twigs, all of them, if you dump it into a kind of an open area, which is done in many of the rural areas, still it is the practice which is carried out, and it is increasingly becoming more predominant and much more popular. So all of that is basically accumulated over an area. It is slightly covered so that it doesn't become very dry, and it is allowed to decompose over a period of time. That different commingled waste, all the organic matter, they will start giving some kind of a smell, which tells you that decomposition has been initiated. And after some time they will be reduced to a kind of a dark brownish soil like substance, very dark brown soil like substance after some time. Now that is your manure that can be utilized in order to increase the fertility of the farmland. And it is an organic method to increase the fertility of the farmland. So you are carrying out the process of agriculture which is sustainable, and a process of agriculture where you don't carry out the process of applying chemical fertilizers, pesticides, etc. So that is your composting. It is done in the presence of oxygen by microbes, primarily fungi and bacteria. The final product is high in the amount of carbon and nitrogen. It aids the retention of more plant nutrient in the soil and augments the soil fertility. Now, sometimes what is done is that these organic materials, they are sprayed over an area, and certain worms are into earthworms, for example. Earthworms are introduced into that organic waste. Why is that done? Because earthworms, they are very good in carrying out fragmentation. They basically will break down the organic matter in so many smaller parts, where basically, let's suppose you had a leaf, a kind of a leaf litter which was this big. It will be reduced into small tiny fragments by the time few of the earthworms are done going through it. So they will consume it, they will excrete it, so you will have smaller substrate which is remain. So many of the time, these worms are introduced in certain areas in order to significantly accelerate the process of decomposition. So that is what is also the process which is referred to as vermicomposting. That is process of compost formation with introduction of worms. That is your vermicomposting. So, vermicompost is again a process of natural biodegradation, but which is accelerated with the presence of worms. Now, when you carry out this process of composting, you do need certain inputs. For example, oxygen is required, right? Oxygen, some amount of moisture, that is necessarily required for the process of composting. And the outcome is what? You have heat which is produced, and certain gases like methane, etc., they are also produced in the process, right? So that is the entire process of composting. Humus like substance is humus. In case you have not seen humus, basically the humus is a kind of a dark brownish to black, the soil that you see outside. Now, it is not exactly having a substrate like a soil, not exactly having a property like a soil, but it will be dark brownish, resembling very much like soil, moist, a bit moist. So that is something which is applied as manure, right? So humus is the organic material, which is a kind of a outcome of the process of decomposition. Okay. Now, This is the process of compost. So, or any kind of decomposition where you observe that various different organic materials such as leaves, straw, woody materials, etc., grass, food scraps, kitchen residues, all of them, manures, all of them in the presence of water, in the availability of oxygen, and in the presence of earthworms, insects, bacteria, fungi, microbes, which you naturally find in the soil. In that process, composting happens. And the byproduct is the release of heat plus gases like methane. Sometimes even CO2 is produced. So that is the process of compost. Okay. In vermicomposting, we human can introduce earthworm. Yes. In vermicomposting, you introduce that earthworm, and earthworm decomposition or fragmentation is the main primary process which happens. Okay. So that is basically the aspect of compost. Now, when we talk about vermicompost or vermiculture, it is what is also known as earthworm farming. In this method, earthworms are added into the compost, and these worms, they break the waste, and the added excreta of the worms make the compost very rich in nutrients. Phosphate, for example, is added into the composted materials by the excreta of these worms. Right. So that is why agricultural waste, domestic waste, and few of the categories of even industrial waste, not the heavy contaminants or chemicals, but few of the categories, when you carry out the process of vermicomposting, there in the presence of earthworms, you basically end up getting a kind of a degraded or decomposed material. So this is how you can handle it. Now then we come to the process of bioremediation. What is the process of bioremediation and why it is used, where it is used, what are the types of bioremediation? Now this is going to be relevant for your examination, for your prelims and for your mains examination. Prelims, the basic concept of it has been asked. So what is the basic concept of bioremediation? That has been asked previously, and also for mains examination, right? That how this process or how this concept is helpful about the utility of the concept. So what is this process of bioremediation? Let's suppose in any particular area there has been lot of waste on the ground which has been created, or there has been contamination which has been created. Now how do you clean that contamination? Let's suppose in the ground surface here you have substantial amount of waste. The soil in this region is significantly contaminated with various different toxins, maybe industrial waste or something like that. How do you clean that? Do you start scraping off the soil? And we are talking about large areas. We are not talking about a small area in which you yourself can stand. If it is a small area, very easily you can pluck it out, throw away the soil, replace it. Fair enough. The work is done. We are talking about a substantially large area. Now, in that case, how do you treat that? Ideally, whatever is the waste, natural degradation of it, if it happens, that is the best possible outcome. If the natural degradation, the decomposition of the waste happens, that is where you will have all that toxin and the waste naturally broken down into nutrients such as nitrogen, phosphate, etc., ammonia, etc., and it can be used up this in the soil in a long term process. But sometimes what happens is that natural degradation of this toxin does not happen. Natural degradation and natural consumption of this waste does not happen. This waste stays and remains as it is. So, in that case, what do you do? In that case, you carry out a kind of an accelerated with the artificial method. You introduce maybe the availability of microbes or oxygen or even moisture, because you want to promote the degradation to happen. The end purpose is degradation of this toxin, right? Whatever this toxin is, whatever this contamination is, your end goal is that this should be taken care of, this should be digested of, but it is not happening naturally. So what do? You end up introducing some amount of microbes, maybe lab grown microbes, which are particularly grown. For example, let's suppose if you have oil waste. Now, natural microbes won't be able to take care of that oil waste. So, you have certain lab grown microbes, for example, oil zapper, oilivorous, etc., which can consume that oil waste. They can break down the complex hydrocarbons of the oil. So, you introduce these microorganisms in this area. Or let's suppose if you have the naturally found microbes which can degrade that waste, then what do? You accelerate that process of decomposition by providing access to oxygen. Now, in the lower levels, here it might be acceptable that oxygen is available. But what about the depth? If the pollution has happened, contamination has happened to a particular depth, at that particular depth, oxygen won't be available. So, what do? You might provide a supply, you might provide a passageway so that the oxygen can come through that, right? So you can provide oxygen, for example. Sometimes, let's suppose oxygen is also not there, moisture is also not there. Because remember, for the decomposition and the degradation of the waste, it is not only the presence of oxygen and microbes which will do the process. Moisture is also available, required. So what you can do in that? So let's suppose here you have the groundwater supply. So you provide a pipeline through which you provide, let's suppose, air at very high pressure, so that this air, along with the groundwater, starts hitting the contaminated area. Right? So, in a way, you are carrying out the process of decomposition itself, but it is not happening naturally. So you are using various biotic methodologies, utilities of plants, microbes, penetration of oxygen, availability of moisture, in order to accelerate the process of decomposition and degradation to happen. Okay, so this is a process that uses mainly microorganisms, plants, or microbial or plant enzyme to detoxify contaminants in the soil and the other environment. So basically, in brief, let me concise it or summarize it for you. Summary. So here you'll find basically the aspect like when we talk about bioremediation, contaminants need to be degraded or decomposed. If it doesn't happen naturally, if it doesn't happen naturally, the process of degradation is accelerated by providing the necessary inputs or the required inputs. And how do you do that? It is done by providing or by introducing natural microbes or lab grown specific microbes, providing availability of oxygen, supply, providing availability of moisture. Either of these are done in order to carry out the decomposition or the degradation of this waste. So either of these activities that you see allows for complete breakdown of contaminants and they treat the soil. As a result. So this is the process which is referred to as bioremediation. That is the process that we know as, that we refer to as bioremediation. I hope this is understood. Now you have different types of bioremediation depending upon whether you have to introduce specific microbes in an area, whether you have to introduce oxygen in an area, whether you have to introduce, let's suppose, the presence of moisture in an area. So depending upon that, you have different types of bioremediation which is there. In absence of oxygen, is it calcination? No, it is not. So that is basically in some way you can say carbon enrichment, but not exactly calcination. No. So that is the process of bioremediation. Then let us take a look at the different types of bioremediation. One is bioventing. Now, venting, you provide a vent. So let's suppose the soil in this region has been contaminated. Now, how do you treat that soil? It might be an industrial contamination. It might be a kind of a waste dump yard where the waste has been leaching in the subsoil and has contaminated the subsoil. So, how do you treat that? So you allow, in this case, you allow the natural microbes to take over, but you accelerate the process of decomposition by providing the access of air and sometimes even the required amount of nutrients and minerals, which can further the growth of specific kind of microbes, because microbes also require certain amount of nutrients so that they can thrive and they can increase their population. So bioventing is a process of stimulating the natural in situ biodegradation of contaminants in soil by providing air or oxygen to existing soil microorganisms. What is in situ here? I hope we are aware about the difference between in situ and ex situ. When we talk about in situ is when that process is taking place where the contamination, for example, if we are talking about contamination, we are handling that waste at the portion or at the place where the contamination has happened. That is in situ, at the own place, in the own particular original place. But let's suppose these contaminants you transfer to somewhere else to treat them, that will be ex situ treatment. Okay, so in situ basically refers to at that place itself. Okay, ex situ, you carry it somewhere else. So in bioventing, you provide a kind of the availability of oxygen and sometimes nutrients and allow the naturally found microorganisms in that area to carry out the process of decomposition. By providing oxygen and nutrients, suddenly the population of microbes in this region that increases tremendously. Okay, so the population of microbes, naturally found microbes in this region, will almost explode. It will have a large population of microbes. Now all of them will start working on the waste, and the waste soil or the contaminated soil will be treated very quickly. But then there is a side effect of that also. The side effect is, let's suppose all that waste is treated. Now you still have a very large microbial population. Now, will the microbial population behave like robots, that now my work is done, my destiny is fulfilled, now time to die and take a rebirth? No, microbes won't operate that way. These microbes will search for food. These microbes will search for areas where they can carry out the consumption of nutrients. So they will start attacking the soil, the surrounding soil. Whatever organic material the surrounding soil will have, the microbes will consume it all. So, in a way, the side effect of it can be that once the waste has been treated, the entire population of microbes can then drain the soil in the surrounding out of all the organic nutrients which are there. Okay, so in this process, because they are naturally found microbes. These are not lab grown microbes. For example, oilivorous or oil zapper, you remove that oil, they won't be able to consume many other things, right? So you have a natural control there. But when you talk about the soil near you and the microbes near you, in that soil, they can thrive in that soil. So even after the contaminants are removed, they will continue their process of consumption. So, side effect or leads to a spurt or a significant increase in microbial population. Microbial population. However, once the waste is treated, the microbial population starts attacking the surrounding soil and drains, not drains, consumes all organic materials nutrients in the soil, making it infertile. Okay, so that is the case of bioventing with its advantage and the disadvantage. Okay, and then you have bioaugmentation. In the case of bioaugmentation, you have to carry out the decomposition or the degradation of the contaminant, and you have to carry it out in such a way that, for example, when we talk about the contaminant which are not broken down naturally, where the natural microbes are unable to do that, then you introduce certain kinds of microbes, specific kind of microbes which can solve the purpose. For example, let's suppose you have a lot of plastic waste in an area. Now the natural microbes won't be able to degrade the plastic, would they? Let's suppose the plastic liquefied and other forms of small microplastics are spread over. You cannot pick it out by hand. Now you introduce a specific kind of microbe which undergo the plasticophagy, which consumes plastic. Now, there you need to provide certain nutrients also which can sustain those microbes. So, you augment the soil with the specific kind of microbes, targeted introduction of microbes along with the nutrients which are required to sustain them in order to decompose those kind of materials which are not naturally degraded or decomposed. Okay, so here basically introduction of introduction of specific microbes targeted for the type of contamination along with nutrients to sustain. Okay, now here you don't come across the problem where they will continue to carry out the consumption process even after the contamination is removed. No, because in this case, for example, these are the microbes which will thrive on very specific kind of condition, very specific kind of input need to be provided for these microbes to exist. So you withdraw those inputs, these microbes, their work will be done. So that is why in this case the control of the aftermath is much easier. So example, oil waste, plastic contamination, etc. Okay, so what is the difference between bioventing and bioaugmentation? How many of you feel that bioventing and bioaugmentation is one and the same? Gaurav, how we stop microbes from making soil infertile in bioventing? So basically, Gaurav, in that case, you don't have much of an option, but then eventually you will have to isolate that area, and that region of contaminant needs to be isolated, and then it needs to be treated. Okay. So everyone is convinced it is different, other than one of you. So it is different basically in the case of bioventing. Observe here you have the naturally found microbes which are going to carry out the process of degradation. In bioventing, do we introduce microbes? No. Do we introduce a specific kind of microbe there? No. So can they take care of, let's suppose, oil waste, oil spill, etc.? Can bioventing take care of the oil waste which is on the ground? No. But in bioaugmentation, you have introduction of specific microbes. In bioventing, what is a vent? Are we aware of the English meaning of the vent? Are we aware of the meaning of vent? Vent is a passageway for the movement of air, the supply of air. That is a vent. Right, so bioventing, you provide a kind of an access for air supply, that is by providing a vent. Augmentation, augmentation is what? You add on some supplement. So in this case, in the case of augmentation, you introduce certain specific kind of microbes in particular which can carry out, for example, oil contamination which happens. Can natural microbes take care of the oil contaminant? No. If the natural microbes could have taken care of the oil contamination, the world would not have any problem at all. Any oil spill would have been consumed naturally by the microbes. Why is it that such a hue and cry is made out of the oil spill? Because the natural process of degradation is unable to take care of them, isn't it? So that is why in bio augmentation, you introduce the specific kind of microbes and they carry out the process of degradation. Is that understood now? The difference, is that understood? Pooja, Vivek, right? Good. It means bio augmentation is better than bio venting? Yes, obviously. And bioventing is done by natural, but then please understand, not everywhere can you deploy bio augmentation, because lab grown microbes are not something that you go to the nearest store and then you say that, okay, get me 1 kilo of oilivorous or oil zapper, I need to take care of the oil waste near me. It is also something which needs to be carried out in controlled condition, etc. So that is why not everywhere can you deploy bio augmentation. It is like, if let's suppose you have a kind of a battle. Now, I understand that fighter jets can be very handy, but then let's suppose you are fighting with your neighbor over a parking space. You cannot deploy fighter jets to kill your neighbor, regardless of how much you want them, can you? But basically, the natural conditions, the natural microbes, if they are able to take care of that, that is venting. Okay. Additional microbes act as catalyst. What is a catalyst, Vivek? I think that your understanding of the entire process of bioremediation has gone significantly haywire. What happens when the work done in bioaugmentation, when work is done in bioaugmentation about microbes? So in that case, basically, Chandrasekhar, understand that these are specific kind of microbes. Now they are consuming these oil waste, plastic waste, etc. But once that oil waste and plastic waste they are consumed, then what will happen? They won't be able to survive quite significantly, can they? Right. So it is not as if there will be a continued propagation of the microbial population. And Chituri, bioventing is done by, but bioaugmentation, very good. Beautiful articulation. Ananya, bioaugmentation have any kind of disadvantage also? Yes, Ananya. For example, getting the availability of the specific kind of microbe is difficult. And we don't always know the efficacy of how good the microbes can consume that particular kind of a waste. Maybe the microbes in the lab conditions, they would have shown an affinity to consume, let's suppose, oil and carry out the breakdown of the oil. But then, if it is, let's suppose, oil mixed with a certain kind of a phenol or any kind of a ketone, then maybe they will have limited extent of impact. So that is why the exact impact of it is not very well known before you carry out the process. So Vivek, understand and listen to this very carefully. What is biodegradation? When you hear about the term biodegradation, or the term, or the fundamental of decomposition, do you think that any chemical or any leaf matter, etc., left outside, without any microbial action, they will themselves decompose into organic matter? No. When we talk about decomposition, it is carried out in various different stages where the microbes, they are not a catalyst to a reaction taking. There is no reaction like H2SO4 in the presence of sunlight in the substrate of KCN, then they will react in order to form a kind of no. It is natural processes of life where microorganisms, they need to consume food. So when they consume food, that food can be anything depending upon the type of microbes. Microbes, they have different, you have billions and trillions of the varieties of microbes, they will consume different materials, right? You develop certain kind of microbes in the lab which, let's suppose, can consume oil. Now, if there is an oil spill, what will you do? You will introduce those microbes in that area so that they can consume oil. Let's suppose I have a kind of a plankton, an algae, which under or a kind of a bacteria, which under normal conditions will consume the leaf matter, vegetables, etc. They cannot break down the oil. I have oily zapper or oilivorous, which will consume only oil. So if there is an oil spill, that natural bacteria will not solve any purpose. So what do? I will need to augment the soil with the kind of a specific microbe, specific bacteria which can consume that oil, isn't it? So you augment it. So it is not a natural reaction which is taking place, that now you have introduced the bacteria, so it will be a catalyst. Catalyst is what? Which accelerates a kind of a reaction, which creates a condition for the reaction to take place. But here, they are directly straightforward consuming it. I hope I'm able to make the difference clear in this case. Then, yes, Gaurav, they can be removed also in many of the cases. Where can we buy the specific microbes? You cannot buy. No, they are produced in labs. Can extra waste be brought to the bio-venting place after? So ex situ degradation is different, Kumari. We'll come to the process of land farming, which is the example of ex situ degradation. And as you said, there are different types of bioremediation based on which the agent is introduced. So for bio-venting, it is oxygen, while microbes are already there. For bio-augmentation, it is microbes. Absolutely, yes. Best articulation. Good. If they are produced in labs, how mass production can be carried out? Why can't it be carried out? By labs, don't think about the dingy chemistry or the physics lab that you had back in school. You have the lab culture, and you don't need to provide them in truckloads that this truck is carrying the microbes, right? Even, for example, if you have a small canister full, that will be enough to take care of a large area of for degradation. And it is not as if you introduce them like how it works in cartoon movies, that immediately you see the soil turning good, and immediately like Popeye, the entire thing is taken care of. It takes some time. It will take its own time. Okay. Now, then we have biosparging. Now, biosparging, as I told you, in the entire process of bioremediation, either you will provide microbes, or you provide oxygen supply, or you provide moisture. Any of them you provide, or you provide all of them, in order to ensure degradation takes place naturally. Now here, when we talk about biosparging, so it involves the injection of air under pressure, high pressure air injection below the water table to increase the groundwater oxygen concentration and enhance the rate of biological degradation of contaminants by, again, naturally occurring bacteria. So here, for example, the image is also self-descriptive. Here you are able to provide moisture, moisture as well as dissolved oxygen. Okay, moisture and dissolved oxygen, all of them you are able to provide so as to enhance the rate of microbial degradation. Here also you use the naturally found microbes. So obviously it is not a choice that today I am feeling like natural microbes should take the job, so today natural microbes, today is Sunday, so lab grown microbes. No, depending upon the type of waste, the type of contamination, accordingly you basically either carry out bioventing, biosparging, or bioaugmentation, depending upon what kind of contamination and at which region that contamination has taken place. Accordingly, you frame a policy, you formulate a plan to treat that. So all these are in situ methods. All these are in situ, where you treat the contamination at the point where it has happened, right? Bioventing, bioaugmentation, biosparging, all of them basically are in situ processes where you treat the contamination at the point where they have happened. So what is bioventing? In a region where there is contamination, you provide a passageway for air in order to carry out the process of decomposition. What is bioaugmentation? Let's suppose you have a unique contaminant like certain kind of acid, certain kind of chemical, certain kind of oil, which the natural microbes cannot take care of. In that case, you provide the microbes in that area to carry out degradation. What is then biosparging? Biosparging is a process where you enhance the moisture availability by providing high pressure air into the groundwater level, because that air will then, that oxygen will then start pushing the water, and the water will have oxygen amount as well. Now, when that reaches the site of contamination, when that reaches the site of contamination, it will increase the microbial action. But here again, naturally found microbes are only used here also. You don't introduce a specific kind of a microbe for doing this particular job. Am I making myself clear now? Is the same side effect of bioventing will happen to bioaugmentation? Not so much, Femina, because there is a kind of these lab grown microbes, or the specifically the microbes which specifically will target chemicals, etc. They, okay, so there is still doubt. Okay, okay, so I understand what is required here. I will give you that what is required. Something that we have been used to from our childhood days, sadly. And then you guys want written definition also. Then you guys, anyways, fair enough. So here, bioventing. Bioaugmentation. Biosparging. Natural microbes used. Artificial natural microbes might not be very clear to those who are having doubt. So let me write it down here also. Microbes found naturally in the region of contamination. Ideally, guys, this is a work that you should do as a student, as a candidate. Please take this preparation period seriously. Please don't rely on spoon feeding, because see, my writing practice, I am good at writing practice. I'm good at writing. I will keep on writing. But then please understand, it is you who need to take up this process of writing, etc. I'm sure by this request that you are saying, giving out, that write it in your own words, write the difference in another slide, so that when we get the annotation PPT, we can simply stare at it and everything will come into the mind. It is not going to help you significantly in the examination. You might not realize it today. Right now, whatever I am saying might appear to be some kind of a total nonsense, that why is he preaching like this? Trust me, the time that you appear for the mains examination, if you reach the mains examination, you will realize the importance of creating your own writing practice, writing things in your own words, rather than relying on someone who has written it and simply wrote learning it. But that will hit you someday. I hope it doesn't hit you too bad. So specific microbes for certain kind of contamination is introduced. It is not found naturally in the region. To be present naturally in a region. Biosparging, microbes found naturally in the area is used. Then oxygen and nutrients for microbes are used or are injected into the soil areas, soil which is contaminated. Oxygen need not be introduced, injected, depending upon the requirement of microbes. Oxygen is introduced into groundwater that oxygenated water under pressure rises up and provides the condition for decomposition to take place in contaminated soil. In brief, again, I understand that you would require a further summarization of this because this might again turn out to be too complicated. That how will we revise this much amount of text? So again, let me do the short work for you also, for this also. Oxygen, or rather only air introduced into the soil. Microbes are introduced in this. Air at high pressure is put in groundwater. Is that understood now? The mechanism, is that understood? The guys who had told to write it in a separate slide, I want you guys to respond, not the ones who had already understood. Vivek, Chituri, Pooja, all of you. Understood? Baldev, is that understood, or do you want me to write something in a more simplified manner? Gaurav, understood? Okay. Another method of bioremediation is also composting, which we have studied, where the natural processes take care of the process of degradation. And then there is an ex situ method of taking care of the waste, and that is land farming, where the contaminated soil is spread over a larger land area and to allow for the decomposition to take place. So in the case of the land farming, I will write it down itself so that the work of explanation will also be done. Contaminated soil is carried away and spread a large area where controlled decomposition takes place. In the presence of moisture and oxygen. It is an ex situ process, and by ex situ process, what we mean is contamination is treated away from the place where the soil originally got contaminated. Is that understood now? Any doubts till now about any of the process of bioremediation? No? Okay. Now we move to Chandrasekhar. In Generally, see, ex situ or in situ basically depends upon the type of contamination and where that contamination has taken place. Let's suppose in the fringes of an urban area, let's suppose there is, or let's suppose there is a kind of a highway network from where in between various different cities. Let's suppose there has been an accident of an oil tanker and the oil has spilled over a region. Now that region is away from habitation. Now, in that case, what do? You can carry out in situ process of treatment, because you can carry out the in situ process, ex situ process, whatever you want to do, because there you don't impact a lot of lives. But let's suppose there's a contamination happening in the middle of the urban region. Now, what can you do? Will you start with scrapping away the soil underneath? In certain cases, you might even do that. Let's suppose it is in the middle of a habitation, you might scrap away the soil and you replace it. So you can carry out the ex situ. So depending upon what kind of contamination has happened, depending upon where that contamination has happened, accordingly you take the policy. And XY, won't the new area get contaminated? So accordingly, basically, you generally do the layering of the ground, and then you spread over the contaminated soil, and then eventually you carry out the process of decomposition. Because, and understand that once you spread that, let's say, contaminated soil over a larger area, the microbes will carry out the, or will take care of the contaminant naturally, and they can take care of the even the newer contamination which happens in the shallow region. So microbes will take care of that. Okay, so no, that problem won't happen. Composted bioremediation. Chituri, have we understood the process of composting? Have we understood the process of composting, which we have discussed earlier? Is this process understood or not? It is the same. Composting bioremediation is again the same. It is the same. Bringing together contaminated soil with non-hazardous organic materials such as manure or agricultural waste, when they are treated, basically, when you keep the waste, accumulate the waste, allow the microbes to take action in the presence of naturally available oxygen, etc. So in this case, what you do, you bring all the waste together. That's it. Now, then we come to the various different governmental initiatives which have been taken to treat the cases of pollution, to cater to or to reduce the amount of pollution carried out in various different areas. Now, amongst these government initiatives, you have the various laws, legislations which have been passed. Not all of them are relevant for your examination. The recent changes, wherever they are happening, please keep an eye out for them. The amendments to the major acts or the laws, wherever they happen, whenever they happen, that is something that you should keep an eye out for. So in this particular portion, recent changes and amendments. Amendments to the legislations need to be looked into. Now, when we talk about the various different acts and measures out of this, the Plastic Waste Amendment of 2022, the E-Waste Amendment of 2022, the Solid Waste Management and its key important concepts and the key principles, right? These are important. So the amendments, latest amendments, amendment in this also, and here, key principles of this involved. These are the areas that you need to be aware of. Other than that, you have various different, for example, biomedical waste management rules, for example, hazardous and other waste management rules, battery waste management rules. You have various different other legal measures or the various different legislations which have also been brought about in order to take care of the problem of pollution. But not all of them are very important. This is just to help you understand that you have comprehensive legislative actions which have been taken in order to cater to the problem of pollution. Now, here, when we talk about the various different waste management, there is an important principle involved, and that is the concept of EPR, or what we refer to as the extended producer responsibility. So, this is what is referred to as EPR, extended producer responsibility. Now, this is important. Now, this was first of all introduced as per the e-waste management rules way back in 2011 when this was introduced in India. But what is this concept? Let's suppose you are an individual who is very concerned about the environment and who doesn't want to pollute the environment. Let's suppose you are very, very concerned about that. You are very eco-friendly in your approaches. You live a very sustainable lifestyle, etc. One day, you are walking from one area to another, and suddenly, in the midst of it, you feel very thirsty. Let's suppose you haven't carried water with you, and suddenly you feel very thirsty. What will you do? You basically will go to the nearest shop, buy a bottle of water, isn't it? You will buy a bottle of water for you. Now, that water is something which is there in a plastic bottle, most of them. The 20 rupees, 10 rupees bottle, it is in a plastic bottle. Now, you quench your thirst, you drink that water. Now, after that, you throw away the bottle because even there it is said that crush the bottle after use in many of the cases. Now, you throw away the bottle. Now, you are carrying out plastic pollution. But then you are basically carrying out a waste disposal, or you are generating a plastic waste. But then that plastic waste which is generated, has this been on your account? Or is it basically because the producer has given that water in the plastic bottle? If the producer would have given that water in, let's suppose, a fabricated bottle, a kind of a fabric based bottle, you could have a kind of an eco friendly condition. Then, for example, let's suppose the mobiles that we use. Now, these mobiles, these gadgets, now most of them, they turn obsolete within 1 year. The new updates come in, or maybe your older phones simply stops working. So you will have, let's suppose, the newer phones come into place, come into the market. Now, what about the old phone? If your old phone consists of lithium, it consists of cadmium, if your old phone consists of various different PVCs, etc., where do you dispose it? Now you are a generator of waste, but who has given that waste in your hand? The producer. Maybe if you are using a phone, the companies such as Apple, they are responsible for that. Or maybe the importers, the producers, importers, refurbishers, assemblers, they are the ones who have given you that product. Now, if you have used that product because that is available in the market and the waste that is generated, how can you be accountable for the kind of waste that you are generating? Plastic bottles. Let's suppose you are thirsty, you go out there, buy a bottle of Coca Cola. Now, that bottle of Coca Cola or Pepsi, which comes in a plastic bottle, they will tell you reuse it, recycle. But where will you reuse that small kind of a plastic bottle? Let's suppose having said that, now we continue with the portion of the extended producer responsibility. As I told you, that it is not always the consumer who is responsible for the kind of waste generated. You go to the market, you use that Coca Cola bottle, regardless of the fact that it is said that reuse it, recycle it, etc., etc. But then where will you reuse it? How many times will you reuse it? Eventually, you will dispose it off. If ever possible, take a look at the nearby garbage dump near your region. You will observe endless number of bottles, plastic bottles, etc., which are thrown. Now, is it the case that the people are requesting the producers that please give me plastic bottles only? No, it is the producers who are producing them. So, thereby, in the process of waste management, you make the producers accountable for the waste generated. You make the importers, refurbishers, the assemblers, they are the ones who become accountable for the waste generated. This was first of all introduced in the case of e-waste management, that is the electrical and the electronic waste. That when you have the electrical or electronic waste, there, what do? For example, a common citizen, and let's suppose at a village level, that person doesn't know what is there in the mobile phone. That person starts panicking when the mobile phone gets heated up. That person doesn't know how to operate the various nuances of the mobile phone. How can that person be responsible for the lithium, lead, cadmium, and the other contamination that the phone will do if you throw it out in the open? How can you hold that person responsible and accountable? That is where the concept of extended producer responsibility comes into the picture, where you make the producer responsible for that. Producer, assembler, importer, any one of them. So here, the concept is very simple, that in the entire value supply chain, you have the producer or importer or assembler, etc. Now they will provide the materials to the wholesalers. They will provide the material to the retailers. They will provide the material to the consumers. Consumers are the ones who will generate waste. But this waste which is generated will have to be taken care of by the producer. Responsible for collection and treatment of waste. Okay. For example, Apple manufactures mobile phone. Apple has got basically the mobile phones which basically is circulated in the market. The market, you and I, we buy it. Once it is used for, once it is completely, let's suppose, out of order, what do? You eventually throw it off. So Apple is also responsible to what happens to that waste. That is what you will find for the past few years. You will find or you'll come across this collect back schemes, which the various retailers, they give you the option that you give us the old mobile phone, we'll give you this much off, and they will tell you as if this is the biggest obligation that they are doing in your entire life, and they are basically helping you out in such a way that nobody else can give you. Basically they are fulfilling their obligations of EPR. Right. So, for example, tomorrow you come across a news story or a kind of an advertisement in the newspaper or in the TV that New Year bonanza, Republic Day bonanza, get your old phones and get a discount of 10,000 or 15,000. It is nothing but the implementation of EPR by these producers, right? So that you give them the old phone, they are able to fulfill their target. Because as per the new norms, as per the new laws, these producers have to fulfill their obligated target, that if, let's suppose, I'm producing 500,000 of these phones every year, I should also ensure that at least 50,000 of the phones, the older phones, I am taking care of that, I am processing that. So thereby you can have a kind of a cleaner environment and take care of the waste, the different kind of waste to be taken care of. So that is basically the entire concept of extended producer responsibility. It has since that point of time been extended to biomedical waste. It has since that point of time been extended to plastic waste also. And now, very innovatively, the government has come up with something very unique in the year 2022, which is considered to be quite innovative for that matter. So basically, that is what is known as the EPR certificates. This is EPR. So this is what is EPR certificate. So now the government has come up with what is known as EPR certificate. Uh, B Rama, here is my mail ID. Encapsulate the entire doubt that you are facing, possibly with the name of the individual who is asking for that, the details of that individual also, if possible, who is doing that. Write a mail to me. I will take this forward as urgently as possible, and Monday I will take care of it. Okay, because tomorrow we don't have a working day for the other department, so it will be taken up on priority. That is something I assure you. Don't worry about it, and you just focus on the studies. Okay, rest everything. We have to take care of other things. Okay, this is my mail ID. Get in touch, and I want the full-fledged details of it. Don't have the half-hearted details written in the mail. Now, when we talk about the EPR certificates, so what are these EPR certificates? So understand the background first of all. Now, earlier, when this concept of EPR was introduced, now this concept of EPR was, as I told you, for example, Apple has been given a target that every year you have to take 50,000 older phones and you have to treat them, you have to cater to them, or you have to ensure the safe disposal of them, etc. Now, think about it. Apple has got a kind of a specialization in doing what? In mobile phone manufacturing. Apple has not got a specialization in where waste is accumulated in Bangalore, at where electronic waste goes in Bangalore, which society generates what kind of electronic waste. Do you think Tim Cook and Apple they are specializing in that? No, they have specialized in manufacturing. So as a result of that, what used to happen was that despite all the stringent targets, none of them could be able to fulfill their obligations. For example, again, a more relatable case. Let's suppose you are not able to relate to the Apple case. Let's suppose you have Pepsi. Now, Pepsi is a kind of an FMCG sector, basically, not exactly an FMCG, but a beverage sector, right? Now, in Pepsi, you have millions of plastic bottles that it sells every year, particularly in countries like India where they are in great demand. So, here, let's suppose they have a target that every year you have to take back and you have to treat, let's suppose, 100 tons. I'm just giving you an example on the top of my mind. 100 tons of plastic bottles. It has got a target to do that. Now, Pepsi's specialization is not collecting the old unused bottle or older bottles, used bottles of Pepsi, which is thrown almost everywhere and anywhere. That is not its specialization. That is not its method of operation. So that is why all the various different organizations, all the various companies, they were facing a significant amount of difficulty in meeting their EPR obligation. As a consequence of that, what would happen was that you had an unorganized sector, which obviously in our country, unorganized sector for waste disposal and management is the one. We have seen in the case of e-waste management also that it is largely almost 95% of the waste management is dominated by the unorganized sector. So the unorganized sector had taken over and has taken over, and there are various different lacunae because of that, because unorganized sector in many of the cases, due to lack of information, they are inefficient also, they cause pollution also, the workers they get damage, they get long term damage, and they basically are impacted on the long run also. So they get impacted. Now, what can be done? So what has been done was that now you have these EPR certificates. Let's suppose, few amongst you, you have decided to set up a startup which specializes in waste management. Let's suppose you have a startup. You have opened a startup in Delhi and you have people working for you who will scour the region of, let's suppose, South Delhi, the region around Saket, Malvinagar, etc. And they will take care of all the plastic waste which is generated and they will collect it, right? From the retailers, from the consumers themselves, from the garbage dumps. They have that specific idea about where that plastic waste is getting accumulated, who is picking up the plastic waste, and they are collecting it back. You have a startup on your own. And what you do is that after collecting that plastic waste and the plastic bottles, you carry out incineration, you turn them into plastic pellets, you supply it to the new plastic manufacturing industries where they can manufacture newer bottles out of them. This is your startup. Let's suppose this is your startup idea. This is your modus operandi. Now, your specialization is waste management. Ideally, the job which has been given to Pepsi or Apple. So you have this startup XYZ. Okay. Now, in 1 year, your startup XYZ caters to 500 tons. I'm just giving you an example again of waste, plastic waste. This is your startup XYZ. Now you have in 1 year catered to 500 tons of plastic waste because that is your specialty. Now, if you have taken care of these 500 tons of plastic waste, you would be given a certificate of recognition that you have taken care of this 500 tons. That is a certificate that, think about it as a credit that you have, right? So you will get certificate or credit for 500 tons. Now, Pepsi had a target for 100 tons of plastic bottles, but it doesn't have the capacity to ensure the uh, carry back offers, to ensure that the retailers give them enough. It doesn't have the wherewithal to do that. So, what Pepsi will do? Pepsi will give your company money. You will get money from Pepsi, and in return, you will give Pepsi or the PepsiCo company certificate or credit for 100 tons. Right. So, in a way, now Pepsi can concentrate on producing cold drinks or the soft drinks, whereas now the waste management that you have done, Pepsi can simply buy off that credit from you. You concentrate on waste management, waste is also taken care of, and in 1 year, all these targets are also met. Right. Let's suppose as a company, XYZ, yes, just like carbon credit. Let's suppose as a company XYZ, you needed some money immediately. You cannot wait for Pepsi to come in and give you some credit, etc. Let's suppose you don't have that wherewithal. In that case, what do you do? In that case, basically, let's suppose you sell it to some other organizations. Can be sold to a financial institute. Just as an example, I'm giving you. As an example, let me write here for example. Otherwise, I have many such students amongst you who basically will take a screenshot after 5 or 6 months. They will shoot out a mail. How could you say this? This is something where, so then I will have to explain it over again. So let's suppose, for example, they have sold it to a FI, financial institution. Now, in this case, Pepsi can pay money to the financial institution and get certificate in return. So this is tradable. This is now a certificate which can be tradable. So what are the benefits of this? The benefits are, first of all, prior to this, none of the companies were able to meet their targeted obligations because it was not their specialty. None of the multinationals had that specialty, so they were not able to complete or fulfill their obligations. Now, the argument which was put forward by some of the people was that, but these companies do that in US, why not in India? If they can do that in US, we can, if the government is strong enough, we will make them do it in India also. We'll make them hold their ears, do up and down 50 times. They will do it in India also. But understand, these companies are operating in the US. These companies are US companies. They are in the good connection with the vendors there, with the suppliers there, and there also you have this tradable certificate system which goes on. But these companies were never able to fulfill their obligations. So if, let's suppose, PepsiCo had an obligation of 100 tons of waste, it could hardly end up catering to 20, 30 tons of waste, and rest of them would be unaccounted for. And what they would do, they would basically bribe the officials eventually, and they would simply have a kind of a free pass. Under these provisions, what now happens is that you will have the growth of these specific companies and startups, which is happening. I hope we are aware. I hope you guys specifically are aware that this is one of those sectors where many new companies are coming up, many new startups are coming up about waste management. So you will have now experts. These companies, obviously, they will not take someone working in an IT sector, someone working in a retail sector that, okay, let's get together, let's start a You will have experts in them handling about waste management. And that will provide, first of all, jobs. Experts and expertise will come into the waste management. There will be money which will be coming into this sector because now the conglomerates, the companies have to pay them, right? The obligations will be fulfilled. So that means a greater amount of waste is targeted. So you are taking care of the waste also. You are providing jobs in the process. Money flows into your system also, right? And expert waste management is also happening, and the companies are complying with the regulations. So this is beneficial. It is a kind of a market mechanism which was earlier available in the carbon sector. Now it has been made available even in the plastic waste and even in the e-waste. Okay, this is not good. Theory and practical differs. Pepsi have to find out method to reduce plastic waste. Is it not so? Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. That ideal world scenario, what would be the ideal world scenario? That Pepsi starts producing soft drinks in a bottle which is eco-friendly. That is the ideal world, isn't it? Ideal world is what? Where the mobile phones that you have, if you throw them off, they naturally decompose and become soil themselves. But have we reached that stage? No. Maybe we'll reach that stage 5 years down the line, 6 years down the line. But in those 5 to 6 years, we might end up generating 50,000 to 100,000 tons of waste easily, easily, much more than that. And we are generating around 150,000 tons per day of waste. Think about it. Even if we are generating 5,000 tons per day of plastic waste, imagine what amount of waste we'll be generating in 5 years, 10 years down the line with the population increasing, the youthful population increasing. So before that entire compliance comes into the picture, what do you do till that point of time? Do you keep on forcing PepsiCo that no, you have to do this, you have to produce it in a non-plastic bottle? They will not do so. It takes time for the technology to come over. So till that point of time, you have to come up with an innovative measure to reduce the problem at the source. That is why this is something which is beneficial. Okay, is that understood? Prashant, my uncle's company is working in the same field for carbon and plastic credits. That is one of the sunrise sectors. 10 years, 20 years down the line, this will be one of the most lucrative sectors out there. That is something which one should keep in mind. Before it comes in glass bottles, now it's stopped. But then the glass bottle things, they stopped in the regions such as US and Western Europe much long time back. Glass bottles used to be provided in these developing and third world countries for a longer period of time. The problem with the glass bottles significantly for a long time was the cost of operation was very high, right? And secondly, there were also issues about contamination, where the glass bottles, many of the times, they first of all, when you refill them, many of the times, the general process would be that the collected glass bottles would be crushed back and new glass bottles would be manufactured, and then in that it would be filled. But in many of the cases, it was found that companies such as Coca-Cola, Pepsi, they were basically cleaning up the older glass bottles and refilling them. Now that led the scope or created the scope for contamination, which was the case which emerged in certain countries of Africa and certain regions of Asia also. That is why, in order to reduce their cost of operation, in general, in any kind of a business, you have to reduce your cost of operation to generate profit. If you don't generate profit, virtually you are non existent. You have to shut down. So, that is basically why that process of plastic, as I told you, plastic is cheap. Plastic has got a good load carrying capacity. That is why. Okay, let's take a break now and let's be back and we will study about the details of the amendment of the plastic rules and the e-waste rules. Let's take a break for 15 minutes and we'll be back. So a well-rounded candidate, a well-formed candidate is the one who is able to look at both sides of the coin. Okay. In today's day and age, sadly, due to the narratives which build up around us, and obviously we are exposed to, and especially at your age, many of you have got a kind of an overexposure to social media, the kind of misinformation, etc. As a result of that, we either, for any particular policy, we think that it is absolutely bad or it is absolutely good. But most of them will have some drawbacks also, some benefits also. And that is what needs to be encapsulated in answer writing. When you create an answer, that needs to be included. Okay. So here the disadvantage of this, if you have to think about it, the only disadvantage that you can think about or that you can talk about is the fact that here the larger conglomerates can escape their responsibility and they can continue their unsustainable practices. That is it. Okay. But that disadvantage has also been catered to, particularly when we talk about the e-waste management rules, etc., the amendment of the e-waste management rules, where the amended management rules have talked about the fact that even worker training needs to be ensured. Even, for example, how do you treat that waste, those workers, their health needs to be ensured. And also the manufacturers eventually have to keep on reducing the amount of mercury, cadmium, and other different types of hazardous materials that they are using. Okay. So here, let us take a look at the plastic waste amendment rules of 2022. Now, it was announced by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and it has been amended for the elimination of single use plastics and to promote alternatives. So, under the new rules, what has been done is that the plastic, plastic is not a kind of a monolith that only you have one grade of plastic. You have multiple grades of plastic, multiple different types of plastic. You have, for example, you go out there in an electronic store to buy an electronic item. That electronic item will be packaged in styrofoam, etc. That is also a grade of plastic. But those styrofoams can be reused, isn't it? But you also have very thin plastic bags that you get from your vegetable vendors that cannot be reused. Similarly, you have packaging plastic. You have, for example, a thicker bottle that you buy from the market, the plastic bottle, that can also be reused and recycled. So you need to have a categorization of the kind of plastic, and then you can enforce the norms and the rules. So here, first of all, classification of that plastic is done. So you have category 1, which includes rigid plastic packaging. That is included in this particular aspect, in this particular provision. Category 2, flexible plastic packaging of single layer or multi-layer plastic sheets, covers made of plastic sheets, carry bags, plastic sachet, or pouches, they are included in category 2. Category 3, multi-layered plastic packaging, right? So that is included. Category 4, plastic sheets as well as plastic bags made up of compostable materials, which are eco-friendly. Now, you don't have to learn this, that what is in category 1, 2, and 3, and 4, but just an idea that categorization of the plastic has been done in order to better manage and reuse and recycle the waste which is generated. Then, after that, you have the plastic packaging. So, in that, the reuse, when we talk about the plastic packaging, reuse of rigid plastic packaging material has been mandated in the guidelines to reduce the use of fresh plastic. So this ensures a significant recycling and reuse of the material. Then EPR certificates. Okay. Now these EPR certificates, basically the guidelines, allow for the sale and purchase of surplus EPR certificates, and this will set up a market mechanism for the plastic waste management. This will boost the economy also, ensure better waste management also, cater to professional waste management, cater to creation of jobs also. So this will boost economy due to the sale and purchase, right? Provide jobs, and also at the same time ensure that there is a kind of a greater efficiency of waste management. Waste management is carried out with a much greater efficiency. Now, there is a centralized online portal which has been made up by CPCB. So, this portal is for the registration and filing of the annual returns by producers, importers, and brand owners of the plastic waste processors of the packaging waste. So, everyone who is making that plastic, who is basically building that plastic, who is indulged in the production, import, the sale of that plastic materials, they will have to register on the online portal if they want to carry out their business legally under the white money operations. They will have to register themselves on the portal, and they will have to register the amount of plastic materials that they have manufactured, the amount that they have sold, and where they have sold it to. So these details will be maintained by CPCB in an online portal. This ensures not only transparency but also ensures that there cannot be evasion of responsibility which will be done by the companies. So this is to ensure transparency, at the same time to ensure that organizations or companies, that is producers, importers, etc., do not evade responsibility. Okay, so that is the case, or that is the purpose to be solved by an online portal. A similar online portal has been established even as per the requirement of e-waste norms as well. The e-waste rules, which have also been amended in 2022, so that similar requirement of an online portal is there. So if you want to operate in black money market, if you want to carry out the operation under the table, so then you have the eyes of the income tax department, etc., which is always there. So you, if you are ready to take that risk, fair enough. But then if you want to carry out a legal operation, if you want to operate the company legally, you need to register on this. Earlier, what used to be the scenario, or till now what still the scenario is, because these new norms have not fully been implemented till now, it takes around a couple of years for any new rules to be implemented on the ground level. So till now, even in many areas, for example, in the outskirts of Hyderabad, in the outskirts of Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, almost in all the cities, you will come across the scenario that many of the companies, they would say they would be manufacturing tons of plastic, and in order to evade tax, in order to evade, let's suppose, accountability of EPR, etc., they would simply say that we have not had any sale, right? Or we sold only around 5 tons or 4 tons. Now, in that situation, they would be able to evade tax also. They would be able to evade scrutiny also. Now that the IT department, etc., they are also using AI and machine learning. So that window is closing. But at the same time, if you give the details of, for example, an intermediary company like PepsiCo, it is buying plastic from some larger organization. So PepsiCo will give the account that I have bought 500 tons from this individual. Now that company has to basically furnish that detail, that where did the 500 tons go. So that is why, as transparent as the system gets, it becomes very difficult for the evaders to have their way. Now, then the comes to we come to the e-waste management rule, the basics of it, and then what is covered under the amendment. So here, when we talk about the e-waste, now in e-waste, you have the electronic and the electrical items both to be included. Now, here you also have, for example, nowadays in our country, for the past few years, for the past decade and a half almost, since the mid 2000s itself, there has been a greater adoption of solar energy. Across the country, the overall movement that you will see is that there has been a greater adoption, a greater utility of solar panels and solar energy. Now, these solar photovoltaic cells which generate energy, they are also going to come into the category of e-waste. Now, once they get old, where do you dispose them? So those solar panels and photovoltaic cells, etc., they have also been included into the category of e-waste. So here, for example, the rules bring producers under the ambit of EPR. Together with the targets, they have been given the targets. Producers have been made accountable for e-waste collection and also e-waste exchange. Hence, those exchange price offers that you would be seeing, and you would observe that almost, I don't know how many of you would have had mobile phone before that, but if basically, just to tell you that if you would go out into the market to exchange your older mobile phones around 15 years back, you did not have such schemes in existence. Now you have many of these schemes. Why is it so? Are they becoming consumer friendly? Absolutely not. It is simply because they are able to, they have a target to meet, and for that target, they need the used materials. Now, here you will find CFL, other mercury containing lamps also have been brought under the purview of these rules. Environment Ministry has notified rules targeting wide range of groups such as hotels, residential colonies, residential welfare associations, bulk producers of consumer goods, ports, railway stations, airports, pilgrimage spots. All of that, in these areas, the plastic waste is generated in bulk. These are the regions where you have bulk generation, e-waste is generated in bulk. So here you have bulk generation of e-waste. For example, when you go to a hotel, for example, even if a switch is a bit fidgety, if the switch is not perfectly well, you immediately pick up the phone, you create a scene there, you create as much noise as possible that how come that my room, this particular appliance is not working well, isn't it? In your house it might be the case that fan itself is not working, light is not working, you have adapted to that, that okay, if I basically turn the tube light like this, then it starts glowing. But in the hotels you won't tolerate that, right? In the hotels, even if I don't operate all the lights, but I need all the lights functioning. So thereby the kind of cycling, the kind of generation of e-waste is humongous in these areas. Railway stations, for example, the pilgrimage spots, the amount of e-waste generated is huge, humongous. Earlier they were not included as separate generators of waste, right? It was very open ended. Now the rules have basically made it a kind of a certainty that these areas or these particular generators of waste also need an accountability associated. Now, here, these rules will launch the new EPR regime for the waste recycling, and the salient features of the new rules are that all the manufacturer, producer, refurbisher, and recycler, they are required to register on a portal again developed by CPCB. No entity is allowed to carry out any business without the registration on the portal, and not nobody is going to deal with any unregistered entity. If let's suppose I have registered and you have not registered, we both can't indulge in a business together. So if you want to carry out business, you also have to register. So in a way, it is about closing the loopholes. Yes, the companies will still find loopholes, right? You will have many of the accountants who will still be able to find loopholes. You will have many of the lawyers, the corporate lawyers who specialize in finding these loopholes. So they will be able to find out loopholes. But as and when the loopholes become very prominent, that is where the policymakers come into place, and that is where they are going to shut down these loopholes. Now, their authorization has been replaced by registration through the online portal, and only manufacturer, producer, and refurbisher and recycler, they do require recycling. Producers of notified EEE have been given graded targets. This is a graded target system. Graded target means what? The target for collection of e-waste keeps on increasing with the years. Every in every couple of years. So that is where they have these graded targets. Management of solar photovoltaic modules, panels, and cells, they are added to the new rule. So here you will observe that all the producers of notified electrical and electronic equipment, they have been given an annual e-waste recycling target based on the generation of what you have previously sold or what you are about to sell or what you have manufactured. So target is made stable for 2 years. So for example, starting with 60% of the total that you are selling or that you are producing, that 60% you have to refurbish or you have to ensure the recollection of that from the year 23, 24 to 24, 25. You have a target of 60% of that what you have sold or manufactured that needs to be taken care of. Let's suppose I have manufactured 100 tons. So 60 tons of the waste, e-waste, I need to ensure that 60 ton of e-waste, I am taking care of that 60 tons. Okay. Then this has been increased to 70% for the year 2025 to 2027, 80% for the year 2027 to 2029. And that is basically how you will be able to generate, you will be able to churn out the kind of increased amount of waste utilization. So, in the next decade or so, you will be able to reach a situation where you will be able to have the companies responsible for almost 100% of the waste that they generate. Okay. Now, the quantity recycled will be computed on the basis of the end products, right? Then the provision of generation and transaction of EPR certificates, tradable EPR certificates have also been introduced here. This brings about brings market mechanism into place. In place. Okay. Then provisions of environment compensation and verification and audit has been introduced. Constitution of steering committee to oversee the overall implementation of these rules. Now, overall, in order to go forward and move ahead into sustainable production, because just the collection and the collect back of these waste, that can never be a long-term solution. So in order to find a kind of a long-term solution, the provision for reduction of hazardous substance in manufacturing. So whatever in the manufacturing processes the hazardous substances have been used or are being used, that needs to be reduced. So reduction of hazardous substances in manufacturing of electrical and electronic equipment has been provided. It does mandate that every producer of electrical and electronic equipment and their companies shall ensure that their products do not contain lead, mercury, and other hazardous substances beyond the minimum prescribable limit. So, this is about the portion of sustainable production. Sustainable production practices. Okay, so that overall the hazardous substances used in the products is reduced. to reduce the quantity of hazardous substances in the final product. Okay, so that is the case in the norms. Now, they also, as I told you, the new norms, they also provide for upskilling because, as we have already talked about, that 95% of the e-waste management in our country happens at the hands of unorganized sector. Now, that unorganized sector has got its own lacuna and its loopholes. So that is why you have a case where upskilling is also required. So it also provides for recognition and registration, skill development, monitoring, and ensuring the safety and health of the workers involved in dismantling and recycling for e-waste. So this is for worker benefit. Worker benefit. Okay, so these are the norms that you observe in the case of the new amended rules of plastic waste management and e-waste management. Now we come to the key principles which were brought forward by the solid waste management rules, which has been introduced in 2016 itself. But many of the norms that it has brought about, not only did it create a lot of furor, a lot of anger amongst the masses, many of the people, many of the activists, in fact, were up in arms against the government when you had the introduction of these solid waste management rules. But then it has got some amount of potential benefit also if it is implemented completely. Even now, it is not being implemented completely in many of the areas, but it can be if it is implemented completely. Now, first of all, you need segregation at source. Segregation of waste at source is absolutely essential. Now, this is carried out in very few places across the country. If you consider the population of the country to be close to around 140 crore, it is that segregation of source would be hardly carried out by 1% or 2% of the population. Even that is an overestimation, because in whichever area that you live in majority of the areas across the country, you come across a similar kind of a norm. And what is that? You come across a norm where, for example, all the waste generated in the household or in any region, it is dumped into the same large plastic bag or the large waste bucket, and that is disposed of. Now, eventually, when you have that kind of a commingled waste, then you need to separate it somewhere, right? And if that separation does not happen completely well, then you have the other consequences. In almost all the countries across the western part of the world, and in almost all the well performing economies or developing and developed economies, you have that concept of segregation of waste at source. The same people, when they live in India, they will throw the waste and the garbage in a kind of a commingled way. But the same people, when they start living abroad, observe them following the norms, and you will be surprised to know that we Indians are so good at following the rules. But we need to implement that in our country also. So that is why segregation at source is an important factor. Collection and disposal of sanitary waste needs to be done separately. Collect back scheme for the packaging waste, for the reuse, recycle, to promote reuse and recycle of the waste. Then user fee for collection. Now this created a lot of anger against the government, because the general perception, the general mentality in our society is we all are a part of the same society. So we should basically embrace the realities of our existence also. The general perception and the general mentality is, first of all, I am giving you my waste. Whatever waste is generated from my house, that is so very clean that other households I don't know, but my household waste is very clean. I'm giving you that waste to take care of it. You should be feeling obligated that I have taken that waste from this person's household, and then you are asking me money also. I'm not going to give the money. Nobody is ready to pay money for the collection of garbage. And that is one of the strangest facts. Try to convince an individual out there, especially in the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities, tier 4 cities, or the small towns, that for the person who will come to collect your garbage, you need to pay some fees. Look at the kind of a resistance that they will give to you, or the stare that they will give it to you. That you feel that money grows on trees, etc. Why will we give money for them? But that money is required because that individual is providing you a service. Municipality is providing you a service. They are collecting the garbage, they are disposing of the garbage, right? Many of the people in the regions, they don't even know where the garbage goes. So they are carrying out a service, and for that service you need some payment for them, and it is very nominal payment which the municipalities take. But what has happened, and what the reality on the ground is, municipalities and municipal the collectors, when they are not the collectors but the people who collect the garbage, when they come, most of the households, they say that we don't have garbage, so that they don't have to pay the money. And when they see a garbage truck moving by, they simply dispose of the garbage nearby, or they will go to the nearest open area and they will start dumping the garbage that from here the municipality has to collect. At least I won't have to pay the money. So this is an aspect of, or an attitude of, mindset change. That mindset change, unless and until it does not happen, we cannot think of a future where the garbage is collected efficiently, disposed of efficiently. Okay, so that is basically where this was a slight different policy as compared to the previous ones. Waste processing and treatment and promotion of compost, and that compost basically is about for the promotion of organic farming. Okay, promotion of waste to energy. Various incentives have been provided for the waste to energy plants, the waste to energy operators. So that is basically the aspect, which the key principles which were involved in this. UPSC has asked a mains question from this particular portion immediately the next year, because that was in the news, that was in current affairs. That is why next year UPSC asked a straightforward mains question, that what are the key principles of the solid waste management rule 2016. So whenever you have such news stories, new legislations which are passed, UPSC will ask you question from that. And that is going, for example, this year, as I told you, the conference of parties for the conference of parties number 28 for the climate change convention is going on in UAE. It has been attended by the prime minister. Now that has it has been a long time since Indian prime minister attended this convention. Chances are UPSC will ask you a question about the loss and damage fund next year, right? So in the mains examination, in all probability, or a prelims question can also be easily framed from that particular area. So whenever these things come in news, UPSC asks a question from that. Okay. Now we come to the portion of noise pollution. But in my city, I'm very proud of my people and residents who are paying money for the garbage collector to collect the waste. But there also, I'll tell you that it would be restricted to a certain area. We need a wide scale implementation. If, let's suppose, your city is carrying out in the entirety, then that is a good thing. That needs to basically be propagated across the entirety of the country if possible. Now, when we talk about noise pollution, what is noise pollution? Excessive exposure to an unwanted sound or audio is noise pollution, right? So regular exposure to elevated sound level that might adversely affect the humans or the other organisms, that is basically noise pollution. Now noise pollution can be created by various different events, by various different purposes, and various different causes also, right? For example, let's suppose train horn, heavy traffic, all of them, construction activities, all of them, they create substantial amount of noise pollution. Now, noise is something, or sound is something that you basically measure in the form of decibels. Decibels is the unit. Now, as per the regulations, you have various different parameters which are fixed for the industrial area, what amount of sound is permissible, for a commercial area, what amount of sound is acceptable and permissible, for a residential area, what is acceptable and permissible, for the silence zones, what is permissible and acceptable. What are silence zones? Silent zones in an urban area, in a township, are those areas where creating noise pollution is not permitted, is not allowed. You create now noise, that is a different matter. You don't have any regulation for it, that is a different matter. Or no penalty for it, that is a different matter, but it is not allowed. Ideally, in the laws, there are penalties also, but it is the enforcement of the laws where we are particularly weaker. Just like any of the underdeveloped or developing nation, it is the enforcement of the laws where that is our weak point. So, here in silent zones, that includes the regions, for example, around hospitals, around schools, around courts, where ideally noise is absolutely unwanted. So those would be included in the silent zone. So this particular portion, what is included in the silent zones, that is what is relevant for your prelims. Okay, so that is something. Hospitals, educational institutions, and the courts, they are included in the regions of silent zones. Now, these are your various different causes of noise pollution. For example, industrialization. Those of you living near the industries, you would always be you would be exposed to noise levels, high amount of noise levels of the machineries operating through and through. And you would have heard that elevated level of sound and noise for a long period of time. So industrialization is one of them. Then poor urbanization. Poor urbanization, what does that mean? Where, for example, you have clustered colonies and houses, narrow lanes, by lanes, and roads. Ideally, the lanes and the roads in majority of our cities, not the main roads, but the roads between the colonies, etc., in many of the parts, they are so very narrow, right? That you cannot have more than two two-wheelers which can move parallelly. But then in that, we move trucks also, we move buses also, we move cars also. And as a result of that, what happens? Frequent traffic jams. Those traffic jams will be very frequent. And we, all of us, we have a different way to treat the traffic jams. When you have traffic jams, let's suppose in other larger countries, you will find that the drivers or the riders, they basically wait for the jams to clear. We think we have a superpower, all of us, and all of us are a part of the same society, so all of us are culprit at the same level. We think we have a kind of a superpower where when we blow the horn, maybe the traffic will automatically clear itself, right? So that is why you will come across that phenomena, and I'm sure you would have witnessed, as soon as there is a traffic jam, strangely, people start honking the horns because their thought perception is that the individual ahead might be they have parked the vehicle and they're sleeping out in the open. So if I honk the horn, maybe the traffic will give way. But it does not. Strangely enough, the people continue to honk the horns, and that creates a noise pollution. The amount of noise pollution that you see in Indian roads, that is something which is at an unparalleled scale, which not it is a specialty of the subcontinent also. That is something that you will observe in the region of Bangladesh also, in Pakistan also, in Sri Lanka you don't observe that very often, in the region of Nepal also you will witness that, and Bhutan population is very less. So that is basically where you have a lot of noise. And understand, when you honk significantly and continuously, that noise, because it is a case of poor urbanization, you have buildings very close by, so that noise kind of resonates and reverberates, and it amplifies itself, right? So that is why it creates a nuisance. Social events, well, social events basically, we uh, we are so ideal, we always blow horn even in traffic jam. Yes, that is the positive side of it. Even if there is no traffic jam, sometimes we feel the compulsive need to blow the horn just to make our presence felt. And the creativity that we have, look at the type of sounds that the horns that they have. Any new audio track or the movie that comes, the horns will have that kind of a sound. Look at the trucks moving on the highways, they go all creative with the kind of horns that they have. So if you have spent so much money on installing those specific horns, why to keep it unused? Honk as much as possible, isn't it? So when we talk about social events, any kind of congregation, right? Maybe a kind of a religious congregation, maybe a kind of a social congregation, a social event. Nowadays, even if you have smaller birthday parties, the first arrangement that the event maker will or event planner will do is install a big loudspeaker. Bigger the loudspeaker, better is the celebration, right? That is the perception. So there, regardless of whatever the general public faces, if today is a Saturday night that I want to celebrate, I will put the volume as high as possible. If my son has graduated or has passed from class 10th or class 12th or has become a graduate, I will celebrate, right? So you have these social events which always are associated with noise pollution. Rarely will you come across a social event which is not very noisy. Then transportation sector, well, ideally transportation and public transportation is something which is advisable, but as I have told you that for us, and this is true for almost all the cities, where if you take a look at the public transport, the buses when they operate, right, or the trains when they operate, the sound that they create, or simply in the roads, the noise that they create with the superpower that they have in the steering, that is the horns, well, that is unparalleled. From maybe you would not have observed these nuances so significantly, you would have seen this, experienced this. From tomorrow onwards, try to observe this, and you will basically burst out laughing on the roads. And that is where the Indian roads become very enjoyable to drive, because you will have such different types of personalities creating their own kind of noise and the melody out of it. That is something you won't find anywhere else in the world. So that is the positive side of it. Construction activities, well, construction activities are again something that will give you a perpetual kind of a noise of brick breaking, of the mortar breaking or the mortar laying for that matter. If let's suppose a metro rail construction is happening near you or a highway construction is happening near you, it is associated with noise pollution. Fireworks and loudspeakers, as I told you, loudspeaker system is one of the favorite peeves that all of us in every part of the society we have. Be it the loudspeakers during festivals, be it the loudspeakers to give a simple announcement, be it the loudspeakers during the political rallies, during the political campaigns. Those of you belonging from the 5 states which have gone through the election right now, you would basically be attesting to the fact. And tomorrow, when the election results will be declared, fireworks are again something depending upon who has won. You might be an individual who has absolutely no interest in any politics, who comes to power, who goes out of power. I have no interest in that. As long as my vehicle has the horn, I don't care about the world. So there also you will observe the amount of fireworks that happen. It will be unparalleled. Now that also is noisy. Now then, agricultural machines, for example, you have the tractors, harvesters, thrashers. They are also associated with a lot of noise pollution. Defense equipments, they are also associated with a lot of noise. Now defense equipments, when we talk about here, now this defense, when we get exposed to these noise, what kind of defense equipments noise are we exposed to? Mostly the, yes, aircraft and jets, right? Rather than the tanks and guns, thankfully, and hopefully that is the case. We are not well exposed to, or we don't get exposed to tanks or the gunfire. It is basically the aircrafts, the fighter jets. It is that noise that we get exposed to. So that can be a source of pollution. Explosive, here, when we talk about explosives, we are talking about the controlled explosives, right? The controlled explosive that you use for mining activities, construction activities, etc. Those are the explosives, the TNTs, etc. That creates a lot of noise. And others, well, anything which is unwanted becomes a noise pollution. Maybe after 2.5 hours, even this lecture becomes a kind of a noise pollution. So any kind of unwanted audio beyond a particular decibel, that becomes a noise pollution. And please use your creativity around you to think about that what can be the sources of noise pollution. And please don't write that the lecture that I attended was a noise pollution, because there technically you will go wrong because of the decibel level, not because of any morality, etc. associated with it. Okay, so that is basically the various different causes of noise pollution. Now, the impact of it, those people who have noisy vehicles, talk to them if you have a chance. Look at the pride that beams on their face with the noisy vehicles. They get it modified in such a way. They spend thousands in order to get the vehicles modified so that with every gear change, every piston fire, there's a kind of a firecracker noise. Look at the beaming smile that they have as people across the road, they start covering their ears. Look at the beaming smile that they have, the pride that they have, the pride that they feel that, look, the effect, when I go across the road, everybody looks at me. That happens when you have a billion plus population. You have to make your presence felt. You resort to these activities in order to make your presence felt. So that is basically, again, one of the sources of noise pollution, right? Yes, the pride associated is what I'm talking about. Talk to any of those individuals who create that noise. First of all, when you go to talk to them that your vehicle is noisy, that in itself will give them the required attention that, okay, the purpose of all that money spent is now fulfilled. So that is something which is very, very common, right? And government has imposed restriction on DJs after 10 p.m. Fair enough. The government, regardless of how many restrictions it imposes, worst come worst, you know what will happen? Your neighbor will come put a complaint that after 10 p.m. this person is still operating the music. What will happen? The nearby police station will get that complaint. The police people will come there. You pay the policeman $1,000. You can play the music after 12 as well. And then next day you take care of the neighbor so as to ensure that the neighbor never complains. So we are living in the same society. So we are all aware about the realities of the dynamics as it plays in the society. It is not the case that from tomorrow the government makes a norm that no firecracker, people will stop bursting firecracker. What people will do, they will burst the firecracker, shut their doors and windows as if I was not even here. The As China does, that we have never done anything bad. So that always happens, right? Can we mention in answer prayer on big loudspeaker at noise pollution? Yes, that goes on in every festival also, in religious congregations also. We are presently through the entire festive months, October, late September, October, November, December, up till January, you have the string of festivals. Look at the noise created by the loudspeakers. Depending upon in which region of the country, which part of the city you are in, you will be exposed to different sources of noise. We are very, very inclusive people in that matter. We ensure that noise reaches each and every corner of the city. If any portion of the city does not get that noise, we put that loudspeaker on the back of the three wheelers, on the auto rickshaws, and then we roam around the city. So, in that way, we are very, very democratic. So, feel free to give any kind of examples that you can. Okay. Now, in such cases, electric vehicles come with an additional advantage of less noise. They do. Electric vehicles are almost, they don't create any kind of noise at all. But you can create an electric vehicle. Try to take out the horn out of the electric vehicle in India. The sales will dip drastically, or they will get it modified and they will have that specific. For example, in almost all the cities, Delhi, you have the entire market around Karol Bagh and Lajpat Nagar. which specializes in installing the specific kind of horns depending upon what is your requirement and what is the uh, attention seeking ability that you have. So they will have a specific horn for you. So even there, you have these kind of abilities. Now, after this, the effect of noise pollution is disastrous. When we talk about the effect, hearing impairment is a very common factor. But again, when you have so much amount of noise, what will you do with a very good auditory skill? So people are acceptable to the fact that some amount of hearing impairment is acceptable. But then, especially in the younger population, in the older population, it creates massive impact. In the older population, it can lead to even heart strokes, right? Brain strokes, Alzheimer's, Parkinson, all of that can be triggered. The animals in that region, they get completely devastated because of that noise pollution. So hearing loss, cardiovascular issues, effect on animals, dementia, Alzheimer's, these are basically the impact. Blood pressure rises up, sleeping disorders. Most of the people in urban areas, they go through that sleeping disorder phase. So that is basically the impact of it. That is why in rural areas you don't find these many issues in terms of health parameters, etc., because all of it adds up. Air is clean, noise is not there, water is clean, crops are better. So that is why people are generally much healthier, right? In urban areas, air is polluted, you breathe in dirty air, you are exposed to that good noise all around you through the day. Then after that, water is contaminated, bioaccumulation is consistently happening, and still we think we are healthy. That is the irony of it, right? So that is basically the aspect of various different types of pollution. Now we have already discussed the diseases due to contaminants such as arsenic, fluoride, and all of those, right? So those diseases due to contaminants, as we annotated PPTs will have that. So basically, you can take a look at this. Okay, testing of missiles. Testing of missiles. Well, that can be thought to be as a source of noise pollution, but I don't think many of us are getting exposed to that testing of missiles, right? Because it happens in Balasore and around the region of the Chandrapur and that Chandipur rather. So that is where you don't have that many missiles which get tested, which creates that kind of a noise, right? And yes, the bullet bikes, I have told you already about that. And did Supreme Court put prohibition on firecrackers? Yes, they did. But what was the impact of that? And Divya, so there was an article that the amount of energy needed to incinerate the waste is more than they generate the amount of energy. So how can we overcome this issue in channelizing this waste to energy? So that is why when we carry out the process of incineration, unless and until you have that critical mass of waste that you are burning, or the kind of waste which has that calorific value, it is inefficient. This is one of the reasons why many of the private sectors, they don't enter into that incineration, because if you don't have the contract for the entire city of the waste management, you won't be turning profitable easily because you will be consuming energy in the production. So that is where pyrolysis comes into place, but that also has got a limited applicability. Incineration, while it can produce energy, incineration should be thought as the prime solver of another problem. Incineration is going to solve your major problem, that is the humongous amount of waste that you are generating. You are able to reduce that waste so that it can be disposed of easily. Okay. Noise pollution can also be heard from natural sources like volcanic eruption. Absolutely agreed. And can a kind of noise become addictive? Absolutely yes. And we all are basically examples of that. We are addicted to the noise. Anurag, thank you for the kind words. and I hope it doesn't turn out to be noise pollution by the end of the session. The irony is, to ignore the noise pollution, we started plugging headphones in our ears directly and we listen to loud music. And that is where the person sitting behind you or the vehicle behind you, they have to put a larger horn. So it is a kind of a vicious cycle which goes on. Yes, even thunder, hailstones, all of them can create noise. But think about it. Which is more noisy? A construction activity going nearby your house, or one thunder or lightning event that you experience maybe once or twice in every 2 months? India, after all, is not a very heavy rainfall region. India is a dry country. India is in the tropics, dry region. We experience that kind of a thunderous rainfall for at max 1 or 2 months, and in various areas, and that too, the occurrence of this thunder, lightning, cyclone, wind, everything will be restricted to a few incidents. Wives murmuring is a noise pollution. Well, I'm too immature to comment on that, so I will withdraw from that. Right, and when I'm boring, I'm tuning in songs with the speaker, loudspeaker, when no one is around me. Well, if you are tuning on to the loudspeaker, you should not be the judge of whether it is noise pollution or not. Your neighbor should be the judge of whether it is noise pollution or not. If they are not complained to the police till now, that means it is still in the tolerable limit. The day that your landowner or your landlord or the police comes to evict you out of your house, that means that limit has been reached. Now, after this, let us take a look at the important conventions to deal with the problem of pollution. So here we have, this is the portion which is going to be relevant for your prelims and mostly match the following kind of a question. Type of questions. So that is where this kind of a question can be asked, that Minamata Convention deals with what, Stockholm, Rotterdam, Bonn deals with what. So that is where, see, I'll tell you now itself. Here we will study about 4 conventions dealing with the portion of pollution, right? The dumping of waste and waste management, etc. But then we will be studying conventions in the portion of the aspect of international organizations also. What I would advise you is create an A4 sheet of paper. Don't manufacture the piece of paper. Take an A4 sheet of paper. There, write a kind of a short note for every convention and its purpose. In single line, that's it. Convention, its purpose. Convention, its purpose. Now, the purpose of that A4 sheet of notes that you prepare is not that you then circulate it to the market and people are studying your notes. No, it should be that every couple of weeks, on a kind of a weekend or any of your leisure days, you should be able to look at that or flip through that piece of paper. In that way, by the time that you reach the month of April and May, the crunch period of time where you don't know what to study, what to ignore, and what to retain, how to retain, at that point of time, by the time that you reach those months, these conventions will almost be there in your subconscious memory. That lowers the load before the prelims quite substantially well. So please do that. It will help you, and it will basically allow you to escape from the hodgepodge that the candidates go through. And eventually, when we talk about the conventions about the environment, climate change, etc., I will give you a kind of a flow chart also, that how this from the Stockholm Conference of 1972, followed by the Brundtland Report of 1987, followed by the formation of IPCC, followed by the Rio Summit, followed by the Kyoto Protocol. I'll give you the entire flow chart so that you have an ease of retention. This is the maximum that you can do to retain as much and remember as much. Beyond that, there is no particular shortcut. Okay, but this is the maximum that I can help you out in this case. Now, about when it is signed, when it is has been ratified, not important. UPSC has not been asking that question. When it came into force, not important. Ignore those. The purpose, where it is applicable, and the convention. That's it. Okay. Sign in 13, comments from 17, applicability turn, make it irrelevant. Okay. So that is where I am telling you that when it has been signed, when it entered into force, that is something you can ignore. Just write the purpose. If you have a better mental capacity, if you have more capacity to absorb more, you can learn that also. But then also, it will be helpful if a random question comes in the mains examination, not in prelims. Prelims, these questions are not asked. Starting with the Minamata Convention. Minamata Convention was basically designed in order to combat the mercury contamination. Because mercury contamination is such, mercury is an element which, even let's suppose in a large pond, you introduce a teaspoonful of mercury, teaspoonful, that is how small it is. It can contaminate the entire pond. And by the process of bioaccumulation and magnification, you will find not only do the fishes they die, but we humans we consume the fishes, and that is where it can be very disastrous for us also. So that is where mercury contamination leads to the Minamata disease. Why the name Minamata is being harped at? That is because it was, first of all, this contamination was found to be reported in the Minamata region of Japan. Japan is a fish eating country. I hope we are all well versed with the cuisine there. So it is a fish eating country. That is where this particular contamination spread very easily. Even the cadmium contamination spread there very easily. Mercury, cadmium, these are generally the byproducts of mining waste, industrial waste. Mercury, you and I also, we use it on a day-to-day basis. Thermometers, right? The thermometers, they have the mercury within them, the mercury column, right? So that is why it is always said, use the thermometers carefully, dispose them with even greater care, because that mercury can end up back in your system. So it is an international treaty designed to protect human health and environment from anthropogenic emission. Anthropogenic, Parveen, basically that refers to human based. Anthropogenic, anthropogenic is about the human cost or the human led. So that anthropogenic emission and release of mercury and mercury compounds. Okay. Now, the convention covers all aspects of life cycle of mercury, from production, trade, consumption, etc. So mercury mining, manufacturers and trade of mercury and products containing mercury, disposal of mercury waste, emissions of mercury from industrial facilities. Countries that have ratified the convention. Now, this is one portion that you have to ensure for prelims, for every convention, right? For most of the convention that you will find that they are bound by the international law, or in certain conventions they have to formulate their own law to adhere to the convention's requirement. So this is where, again, why I'm telling you is because UPSC has asked this kind of a question twice, once in 2016 and another time in 2018, that whether the countries need to formulate their own laws as a part of this convention, or whether they are bound by the international law. So that kind of a statement based question, when it comes in the pressure and in the heat of the examination, majority of the candidates get it wrong. So that is where you need to be very careful. So the countries that have ratified the convention are bound by international law to put these controls in place. Okay. Minamata is a disease. Minamata is a place where you experience, where for the first time that mercury contamination was actually reported. Now, Minamata disease is a disease caused by methyl mercury poisoning that was first described by the inhabitants of the Minamata Bay in Japan, and resulted from their eating fish contaminated with the mercury industrial waste. The disease is characterized by peripheral sensory loss, the sensory organs that you have, audio, then visual loss, then sometimes it can also lead to speech impairment, then your skin or the nerves becomes unresponsive, tremors, and both hearing and visual loss, they are a part of that Minamata disease. Okay. again relevant for your prelims. Okay. Now, then you have the Basel Convention. Please don't get confused. Don't confuse this Basel Convention to the Basel norms that you study in economics, right? The Basel norms in economics that you study for the banking sector, this is different. The city is the same, but those are very different. So, Basel Convention is about the transboundary movement of hazardous waste and their disposal. The Basel Convention directs a prior consent approval method to control the transboundary movement of harmful and other waste to reduce their adverse effect on the environment and protect the individuals from that hazardous effect. Now, here you might think about it that what transboundary movement are we talking about? So, understand what has been the practice, how skewed the world order is. That is why sometimes when you basically listen to these countries and the heads of the countries and the organizations of these countries, the activists from these countries, like US, like the regions of Europe, UK, when they start preaching us Indians that you are doing this wrong, you are doing that incorrect, this is how you should do it. That is why it should basically make your blood boil. Basically, all these countries, they have been indulging in a practice for decades now, where the waste that is generated in their country, be it the chemical waste, be it any kind of the garbage that they generate, if they don't have the treatment facilities, what do? They sell it off. To whom? To the underdeveloped and developing countries like India, Sri Lanka, African countries, Bangladesh. They sell them their garbage. That now it is your problem. Now, why do the countries buy that garbage? So that they can recycle that. Right? There are incentives involved. As late as last year, you had a consignment when Sri Lanka was going through that economic turmoil and crisis. It was late 2021 and early 2022 when you had a consignment of garbage which was coming to Sri Lanka from UK. Sri Lanka declined because Sri Lanka, on one hand, went into that economic crisis because it was promoting organic farming. It wants a cleaner environment because Sri Lanka is thinking about a future for ecotourism. All the best to them. Good luck to them. So they want to keep the region clean. Now, they declined that shipment of garbage. The reaction that the country of UK that gave, the activists that gave, the various different NGOs involved, they gave. Immediately, you had a lot of articles started coming out in the newspapers, English newspapers, that is Guardian, Sun, all of them. Immediately they started reporting how Sri Lanka is absolutely irresponsible. It does not know how to tackle its economic crisis. When countries like UK and US are trying to help, it is not taking the help because the people in the government, they are irresponsible. You need newer people to come in. The existing people are tyrants, they are despots, etc., etc. That has been the case for a long period of time. The region of Alang in Gujarat, where you have the very famed Alang shipyard. Now, that Alang shipyard used to be one of the largest ship-breaking yards of the world in terms of the capacity that they would handle for some period of time, at least in Asia. Not across the world, but at least in Asia. So, what would happen was that the older ships, which the Western countries, they felt that it is no longer utilizable for them, they would send it to the shipyard for breaking. Now you might have a question, why don't they do it in Michigan? Why don't they do it in other eastern coast of US where you have the shipbreaking yards? The reason is when you break the ship, when you salvage the waste of out of it, fair enough, you get that steel where you can basically sell it off for scrap. Along with that, you have asbestos, you have bunker fuel, you have radioactive materials. And the people working in the shipyards, the research has indicated they have lower life expectancy because of the contamination that they are exposed to. They get various different, what is known as lifestyle or occupation hazards. Because of the work that they do, they suffer from these diseases. People, they die a lot younger. Thankfully, now that region of Alang shipyard is no longer handling that amount of shipbreaking activities. That place has now been taken by Bangladesh. And this happens. Earlier, it was China which used to handle all that waste, take care of that waste. Then, as the prosperity happened in China, China grew at a rapid, incredibly rapid pace, where the income levels they started increasing. When your income level is slightly higher, why would you indulge in such occupations? You won't. Then all those jobs came to India. Now, as India's income level is slowly on the rise, we are not increasing at the same rate at China as China did, but we are improving nonetheless. There, now these jobs are shifting to Bangladesh. After Bangladesh, probably it will shift to a sub-Saharan country. But the Western countries, they ensure my backyard is clean, my city is clean, and then they will have the guts to come to your country and tell you you are generating waste. So that is where it is about setting the global narrative. And for that, the Basel Convention was arrived at. And here, the aspect of it that if you are sending a waste to some other country, at least tell them what is there in that waste. Get a prior consent approval from them, and only then go for the transboundary movement of that waste. Okay? Now, the objectives, the main focus of the Basel Convention to prevent the movement of hazardous waste from developed nations to developing or underdeveloped countries and reduce the transfer of hazardous waste among countries across the globe. And this international treaty has aimed to reduce the movement of dangerous waste such as toxic, flammable, explosive, and corrosive waste between the countries. Okay. However, another point which is relevant for your exam, for your prelims, radioactive waste are not covered under this convention. Okay. Now, after that, here the Basel Convention also assists the less developed countries in the environmentally sound management of their generated hazardous waste. Again, relevant for your prelims. So, sound management of waste by other countries by minimizing the amount of waste and toxicity of the waste. Now, here also, as is the case with any particular convention, the chief decision making body is Conference of Parties. Conference of Parties. That is basically the chief decision making body of that. Okay. So it meets twice a year in this case. In the case of Ramsar Convention, how frequently does the Conference of Parties they meet? Three. Three. Very good. In this case, it is twice a year. So these details I need you to mention in an A4 sheet paper. This is the example of the kind of waste that are considered hazardous under the scope of Basel. So consumed or exhausted lead acid batteries, biomedical waste, stubborn organic pollutant waste, explosive waste and utilized oil, the used oil, then PCB compounds, the PCBs that are used, heat exchange fluids that you have in the even in the electronic equipments, your laptops, your computers, all of them. Even when you talk about the hydraulic fluid in your vehicles, right? So all of them. Then harmful chemicals, insecticides, chemical waste generated, electronic and electrical waste, ships intended for dismantling, even for the mercury waste. Okay, right? Kamlesh, sir, but regardless of the kind of waste there is, underdeveloped countries will still accept it. Yes, but if there is a convention which protects them, at least you will have some scope of protection, right? That scope of protection is required. However, still the countries they need money, they do that. That is the reality of the world. We cannot shy away from that. Then you have the Stockholm Convention. Now, this is different from a Stockholm Conference, right? So, when we talk about the Stockholm Convention, it is a global treaty that aims to protect the human lives and human health from the persistent organic pollutants. What are these persistent organic pollutants? So, when we talk about POPs, persistent organic pollutants, they are a group of chemicals possessing the characteristic that they are, first of all, toxic to humans and wildlife. They can last for many, many years in the environment before degrading into less dangerous form. That is why the name persistent. They bioaccumulate in the food chain and they can be transported over large distances. Let me simplify this for you. For example, when you use chemicals such as DDT, Eldrain, Myrex, all of these, or the industrial chemicals or the byproducts of these industrial chemicals, now these chemicals, majority of them, they will stay in the soil, for example. Insecticides, pesticides. Now you are growing, you are spraying that insecticide and a pesticide on a crop, right? That is where you spray them. I hope we are all aware that insecticide and pesticide, we spray it on the crop field and we don't use it just for leisure purposes that we will remove the smell in my house or we'll fight off the mosquitoes with this. So it is in the crops that you spray. Now, when you spray this, these pollutants will get into the plant system also, isn't it? Maybe the crops that have been there, they will have some amount of this organic pollutant. You eat that crop. Now, these pollutants are such, they are water insoluble, they are fat soluble. Okay, so here they are fat soluble and water insoluble. Meaning what? What is the meaning of this term? Fat soluble, water insoluble. Suppose in my body, I get a contaminant which can be dissolved in water, which is soluble in water. Now, my body will have, or I will take in lot of water, lot of various in a day or in a couple of days, I will drink a lot of water. Now, those contaminants will get dissolved in that water. And after that, maybe that contaminant passes through the bloodstream in rare cases. But other than that, that uh, uh, contaminant which has been dissolved in water will pass through the small intestine, large intestine, and will be excreted out in general. So thereby, the contaminant buildup in my body won't happen, or the passing on the contaminant from one to another won't happen easily. But you have certain contaminants which are not soluble in water, but they get dissolved in the fatty layers of the body and the fatty cells of the body. Now there, the fatty cells and the fatty layers, you don't excrete that. That persists in your body, isn't it? Now, when you have a mother lactating and feeding her child, now the mother's milk primarily consists of fatty cells also in large quantities. So from the mother to the child, when those fatty cells which are contaminated with that toxin, that goes into the young child. And in that infant, that toxin buildup starts happening, maybe at the age of few months. Imagine the impact, the significantly deleterious and disastrous impact that it will have on the health of the young one. So these are your organic pollutants which are persistent, means they remain. Persistent means they remain for a long period of time before disintegrating into a different compound. That is where bioaccumulation in the body continues to happen, biomagnification across the food chain of various different systems, that also happens. So all those such pesticides, insecticides, industrial chemicals, solvents, they come under the category or under the control of the Stockholm Convention. Okay, so Stockholm Convention deals with POPs, and POP, not the plaster of Paris, persistent organic pollutant. Okay, remember that. Now, here again, important point for your prelims. When we talk about the salient points for Stockholm Convention, The Global Environment Facility is that I'll tell you more about the Global Environment Facility and when it was formed in the next week. So it is the designated interim financial mechanism for the Stockholm Convention. UNIDO, it takes the responsibility for the developing nations and the transitioning economies to help them implement the provisions of the Stockholm Convention. Then you have Rotterdam Convention. Rotterdam Convention is again dealing with a kind of a prior informed consent procedure for certain kind of pesticides and hazardous chemicals in transboundary movement. Understand, these POPs here, they are controlled in every region, right? It is not about transboundary movement here, about the insecticides, etc. Here we are talking about again international movement. Basel Convention dealt with the hazardous materials and their transboundary movement. Rotterdam deals with certain other kinds of hazardous and pesticides. Okay, it is administered by Food and Agriculture Organization (FAO) and United Nations Environment Program (UNEP). It has three different lists consisting of pesticides, industrial chemicals that have been banned or have been severely restricted. It covers those pesticides and industrial chemicals that are banned or severely restricted, and any concern related to pesticides and industrial chemicals promotes them into included into a banned list, that is the Annex 3 list, and it needs a prior informed consent. Prior informed consent. Okay. Also may contain those chemicals and pesticides that present a risk under the conditions of use in developing nations or countries with economies in transition. So that is the portion of Rotterdam Convention. And that brings us to the end of the module. And now we come to the portion of climate change. Ananya, you had certain basic types of chemicals, pesticides, etc., which have not been included in the list of Basel. They are included in Rotterdam. LDC refers to the less developed countries of the world, right? And Kapil, my dear friend, I understand your predicament, and see, we are trying to resolve that issue to the best of our abilities. That should be sorted out within the next few days. I'm not talking about weeks or months now. It should be sorted out in the next few days. But then, till that point of time, please carry out the preparation from the PPTs, from the digital reading materials. Please don't let your preparation get hampered. The NCRTs are available online. We will try our best, and humble apologies for that. We are trying our best at all the levels to resolve the issue. Okay. Pharmaceutical chemicals are included in this list? No. Gaurav, if you have harmful chemicals used in pharmaceutical industry, that is a big no-no anyways. Gaurav, why do developing countries buy waste from developed countries? Do they get money also? Because from that waste, they have to recycle something. They get that recycled material, and it is also bid out. Yes. Okay. So should we carry on the class for another hour and carry on with the portion of climate change? Or have you reached the level of saturation? The panic which is created. Oh my God. No, no, I'm not going to be so harsh. Don't worry. Fair enough. Have your Saturday night, play out the loudspeakers, ride that motorbike with that modified sound. Have a good time. We'll meet again on Monday. That is when we'll carry out the discussion furthermore. We will talk about climate change and biodiversity on Monday, and we will continue further. In the meanwhile, do take up the subjective and the objective test, which would be uploaded in the portal. And that is all from my side. I hope the session was tolerable and some new information has been added. Just ensure that you revise it whenever the time comes, whenever you feel that the time is right, or whenever you feel like revising, do revise it. Till we meet again, do take care of yourself, relax, have a good night. Goodbye.